excessive importance on the question, what is God? Which is the first question of recapitulation. So on the one hand, he was criticized for not adhering to recapitulation certainly enough, strongly enough, and on the other hand, he was criticized because he overemphasized the question, what is God? And you know the question, what is God, is the very first question in recapitulation. It is that from which all else comes. You see, it's that one great question, what is God? And then she says God is incorporeal, divine, supreme, infinite, mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, love. Think of it, what she gives there, my gosh. It's overwhelming. How anyone could overemphasize that, I don't know. We spend our whole lives emphasizing. It's the only thing to emphasize. It is the one question. It's the great problem of being. Every problem reduces to that problem. Every question reduces to that question. What is God? How you could overemphasize it, I don't know. And the whole deduction through recapitulation is a deduction out from the first question, what is God? And the second question is, are these terms synonymous? She says they are. They are intended to express the nature, essence, and wholeness of God. Yeah. Let's see, what else? Oh, wonderful, wonderful point there. You see that bringing out really the fact that we must understand these terms, that they are synonymous, but do we know what synonymous means? And the field has missed the boat here, because the field thinks that synonymous means equivalent, and it does not mean equivalent. Are these terms synonymous? She says yes, and so the whole field thinks, well, good, then it doesn't matter which one I use. Right? They are completely interchangeable. And John Dorley could see they are not completely interchangeable, because synonymous has two sides, two aspects of meaning. It means that if two terms are synonymous, they coincide in a certain aspect of their meaning. In that aspect in which they coincide, they may be used interchangeably. But they also have aspects in which they do not coincide, but are different from each other. In those aspects, they cannot be used interchangeably. Can you hear that? Mm-hmm. Can you hear that? Which means what? That we must know the difference between them. The difference between them. What is it she says in that second, let me get it. Are these terms synonymous? Oh, beautiful. She says they are. They refer to one absolute God. That's where they are interchangeable. They all refer to God. So I can say, mind is God, spirit is God, soul is God, principle, life, truth, and love are God. Is that the end of the answer? No. They are also, if you have an also, it means, now I'm going to tell you something else. Further, they are also intended to express the nature, essence, and wholeness of deity. The attributes of God are justice, mercy, wisdom, goodness, and so on. And so she indicates towards the second side of the meaning of synonymy, namely that they are not interchangeable when you begin to see how different they are from each other, how mind expresses God differently than spirit expresses God. That soul expresses God in a completely unique way from principle, life, truth, or love. And so the synonymy question is one that has not been seen clearly by the field, and this is why they do not understand the Christian Science textbook. You cannot understand the Christian Science textbook if you do not know the synonymous terms for God. And you do not know how they differentiate what God being is. So one great facet of our work, the first great wonderful thing that we must do, is to get hold of those 7 synonymous terms. To get hold of that first great category of being. If we can say there are 3 great categories of being. We take the infinite one, the one being, the one God, meaning by that one being all, everything. That there are 3 main categories. And the first category is the nature, the 7-fold nature of God. The second category is the 4-fold operation of God. So that once we have seen what mind is, how mind is different from spirit, what soul is, principle, life, truth, and love, so that they begin to stand out to us, to take on form to us, to have a meaning for us that they've never had before, so that we don't blur them. They're not blurry to us. We don't mix them up anymore. They're distinct identities. They are distinct values. That when we've seen that first great category, then we begin to realize, well, these constituents are not static. They move. They're dynamic. They move. They operate in a calculus. That's what John Dorley could see. That what John the Revelator brought forth, the vision of John's vision, was the vision of the calculus of being, of the operation of being, the operation of God, of how the principle operates, of how the whole nature of being operates. That it's a 4-fold operation. That the nature of being operates through the Word, the Christ, Christianity, science. What do we have with these first two categories that we see already? We have what Mrs. Eddy referred to in her textbook as the key to the Scriptures. As what does she present in the chapter Genesis? She presents the 7-fold nature of God through the days of creation, the science of creation she presents there. And then she comes in as though to say, now, show you the other aspect of that key that will unlock everything. She said it's the key to the Scriptures. It's really the key to everything. It's also the key to the textbook. It's the key to the whole of life experience, to the whole universe. And that second chapter there is the Apocalypse, and in the Apocalypse she gives us the city 4 square. She tells us what that city is, what that consciousness is, as the 4-fold calculus of being. So, gosh, you see how carried away I got? carried away and just entertained by that fact that that John Dorley would be criticized for overemphasizing the question, what is God, when it is that which is the pith of everything, the heart of everything. He was also criticized because he allowed his students to talk about Christian Science, to discuss Christian Science, and so was asked to give up his right of free assembly, and he said he wouldn't do it. And so you can imagine that he was eventually compelled by the circumstances which, if you are interested in tracing and reading about in detail, are available to you in John Dorley's statement, where you have a brief introduction to the system of Christian Science, and also a complete presentation of the correspondence between John Dorley and the Mother Church that went on at that time. And so he left, and he finished his life work outside of the organized church. Dr. Max Kapler of Zurich, Switzerland, was a pupil of John Dorley's. He went through class with John Dorley in 1937. He has dedicated his life to the study and research of the Christian Science textbook. He is a lifelong Christian Scientist, focusing not only on the textbook but also on the Bible, as with Mr. Dorley. In his earlier years, after completing his PhD in economics at the University of Zurich, he began to pursue the more scientific sense of Christian Science and joined John Dorley's research group in London in 1938. During the war, he worked for the Swiss Department of War Economy, actually. He had his PhD in economics and had then at that time a very prominent position. After the war, he held a further position that was of high standing in a private business. He gave all that up, and in 1948 felt compelled to devote all of his time and research to the study and teaching and practice of Christian Science. Since that time, he has taught really well on the continent and in Great Britain and in the United States. He's held regular classes, has come yearly ever since 1967 to the United States, nearly every year to the United States. In other words, for the past 27 years, he has come and taught us, and we are blessed by it. He will return in June and July of this year for a further summer school in the United States. He has countless books and writings and thousands of hours of recorded lessons on the subject of Christian Science, the science of Christian Science, and the textbook. He is the chief exponent of the advancement and evolution of this idea of Christian Science today, devoting his life to the scientific understanding of the principle that Mrs. Eddy taught. He has unlocked the textbook for all mankind. In 1973, in order to help disseminate his writings and teachings, and in order to promote the idea of the science of Christian Science, a nonprofit organization was set up, a research and educational institute. This is the Kapler Institute. It is devoted to the non-sectarian study of Christian Science. And its purpose, again, is to provide all the means that are possible, be it books or tapes or classes or conferences or talks like this, study groups and study guides and complementary literature and so forth. Everything that will support and encourage individual and independent study. So that is the thumbnail sketch of John Dorley and Max Kapler. I hope that you leave here today with an awareness of these two scientific giants that you perhaps did not have before. I want to answer another criticism, a wonderful criticism, and that is the criticism that says, you are always talking about numerology, that you are talking about numbers, huh? 7 this, and 4 that, and 4 this, and 7 of those, and 12 of these, and 3 of those. Aren't you just teaching numerology? Haven't you turned the whole thing into numerology? Haven't you taken just one aspect of what Mrs. Eddy has taught in the textbook and really accentuated it so drastically that it becomes something that isn't Christian Science? And my answer is no. No. We do not teach numerology. And I would ask anyone who is here, anyone who sees this video, to go to your textbook and to see what Mrs. Eddy says about numbers, about numerals, about the numeration table, about the 7, about the 4, about the 12, about the 1. I ask you to do that, and you will find a treasure. You'll find something great. Let me just share with you some of the things that Mrs. Eddy says, not only in the textbook, but also in prose works. She says, for instance, in miscellaneous writings, in science, all being is individual, for individuality is endless in the calculus of forms and numbers. In Pulpit and Press, she says, is not a man metaphysically and mathematically number 1, a unit and therefore whole number, governed and protected by his divine principle, God? You have simply to preserve a scientific, positive sense of unity with your divine source and daily demonstrate this. Then you will find that 1 is as important a factor as duodecillions in being and doing right, and thus demonstrating deific principle. At the beginning of the textbook, Mrs. Eddy speaks of herself as lisping in numbers, for the numbers came. Then throughout her text she presents the principle, really, of spiritual mathematics. She refers to spiritual mathematics. And finally, in the 15th chapter, nearly at the close of her textbook, at the conclusion of the exegesis on the first record of creation, she says, "The numerals of infinity, called 7 days, can never be reckoned according to the calendar of time. These days will appear as mortality disappears, and they will reveal eternity, newness of life in which all sense of error forever disappears, and thought accepts the divine infinite calculus." She says in